I'm so happy you're here today. Usually, the stories I share are written to feed your mind. Stories that help you think deeply, grow wiser, and learn new words in English. But today's story is a little different. Today, I want to share a story that feeds the heart. This is not just a story to help you learn English. It's a story to help you feel. It's about love, friendship, memory, and the quiet beauty of life. The things that connect all of us, no matter who we are or where we come from. The story you're going to hear today is called The Bench by the River. It's written especially for English learners who love to practice both listening and reading. It's a Level 3 story, which means it's perfect for intermediate learners. The English is natural and clear, but you may hear some words that are new or a little challenging. Don't worry. That's a good thing. Every new word you learn brings you one step closer to fluency. As you listen, don't try to understand every single word. Instead, focus on the feeling of the story, the sound, the rhythm, the emotion behind the words. Let the sentences wash over you like the river in the story itself. You'll discover that language learning isn't just about studying grammar. It's about feeling connection through words. This story is calm and emotional. It may touch your heart in quiet ways. It reminds us that love never really disappears. Even when people are gone, their kindness and memories remain, like gentle ripples on the water. So sit back, relax, and listen until the end. Let this story speak to both your English and your heart. If you enjoy stories like this, please leave a comment below and tell me what you felt. I truly love reading your thoughts. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Read and Learn English, I invite you to join our growing family of learners from around the world. Together, we'll keep learning, not just with our minds, but with our hearts. Part 1. The Old Man by the River. Every morning when the town was still quiet, an old man named Thomas walked slowly toward the river. He never hurried. His steps were small and careful, as if he wanted the morning to last a little longer. The air was cool and fresh, and a light mist covered the fields. The sky was soft and pale, colored like milk before sunrise. Birds were just beginning to sing, and the sound of their voices mixed gently with the sound of flowing water. Thomas always wore the same brown coat. It was old but clean, and it suited him. In one hand, he carried a small paper bag. Inside were a few pieces of bread. When he reached the river, he sat down on the same wooden bench under a big oak tree. The bench faced the water, and from there, he could see the slow movement of the current, the tiny ripples, and the reflections of the sky. It was his favorite place in the world. Every morning, Thomas fed the ducks. They knew him well. As soon as they saw him, they swam closer, making small circles in the water. Thomas smiled and threw pieces of bread into the river. He watched them fight and play, his eyes soft with kindness. Sometimes he talked to them quietly, as if they were old friends. "Good morning, my little ones," he would say. "You're early today." Of course, the ducks didn't answer, but that didn't matter. Their company was enough. People in town often saw him there. Some waved as they passed. Others just smiled and continued walking. Everyone knew Thomas, but not many knew his story. They only knew that he lived alone in a small house near the edge of town, and that he came to the river every morning without fail. Rain or shine, winter or summer, Thomas was always there, sitting on the same bench, looking at the same river. Sometimes children came to play near the water. They laughed, threw stones, and ran along the path. Thomas always smiled at them, but his smile carried a little sadness, like a quiet echo of something lost. When the children left, the silence returned. Thomas didn't mind the silence. He had grown used to it. In silence, he could think, remember, and breathe. He often thought about the past, not in a painful way, but in a gentle, peaceful way. He remembered his wife, Anna. She had loved this river, too. In fact, it was Anna who had found the bench many years ago. She used to bring a small picnic basket and sit there with Thomas for hours, watching the water and talking about dreams, plans, and little things that didn't really matter but somehow felt important. The bench had become their place, a small world made just for two. But those days were gone now. Anna had passed away several years ago, and Thomas had never been the same since. Yet, instead of avoiding the river, he came here every day. It was the only way he felt close to her. He liked to believe that the wind carried her voice, that the river remembered her laughter, and that the oak tree whispered her name. Sitting there, he felt she was still with him in some quiet, invisible way. As the morning light grew stronger, the mist began to disappear. Thomas looked at the reflection of the sky in the water. "Another day," he whispered. "Another morning with you." He didn't speak loudly. His voice was soft, like a secret between old friends. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the warmth of the rising sun touch his face. The river flowed gently, just as it always had. Life moved on, quietly, steadily, and Thomas, sitting on his bench by the river, continued his silent conversation with the past. Part 2. The Empty Bench. The next morning, Thomas followed his usual path to the river. The sky was clear and blue, and the air smelled like wet grass and sunlight. The same birds sang from the trees, and the ducks waited by the shore as if they already knew he was coming. Everything looked just as it did every other day, quiet, peaceful, familiar. Yet, when Thomas reached the bench, he stopped for a moment. The bench was old, just like him. The paint had faded, and the wood had dark lines from the years of sun and rain. He ran his fingers along the back of it and smiled softly. He could still remember the day he and Anna first sat there. It had been spring, the air warm, the flowers just beginning to bloom. She had worn a yellow dress and a small hat, and she laughed when the wind tried to steal it away. That laugh had stayed with him all these years. Sometimes he could almost hear it again when the wind moved through the trees. He sat down slowly, placed his paper bag beside him, and looked at the water. "Good morning," he whispered, as if Anna could hear him. "It's a lovely day today." He smiled, though his eyes were wet. Talking to the empty space beside him had become a part of his mornings. Some people might have thought it strange, but Thomas didn't care. The silence was no longer empty when he spoke to her. There were days when he could almost feel her presence beside him, the warmth of her hand, the sound of her soft breathing, the way she would lean her head on his shoulder. Those were the moments that made him come back again and again. The river had seen all their years together, their first picnic, their quiet evenings after long workdays, even the day she told him she was sick. He had tried to be strong then. Anna had smiled, even through the pain. "Promise me," she had said, You'll keep visiting our bench. Even when I'm gone, you'll come here. Talk to me. Tell me about your days. I'll be listening. Thomas had promised, and every morning since the day she left, he had kept that promise. The bench was not just wood and paint, it was a bridge between the present and the past, between what was lost and what still remained. As he sat there now, a few people passed by on their morning walks. Some nodded politely, one or two smiled. They had seen him so many times that his presence felt like part of the scenery, as constant as the river itself. A few curious children sometimes asked their parents, "Who is that old man?" Their parents usually answered, "He's just someone who loves the river." But Thomas wasn't just someone who loved the river. He loved what the river held: memories. The sound of the water reminded him that life never stopped, not even when hearts were broken. It moved forward, gently carrying everything that once was, like small leaves floating on its surface. He took a piece of bread from his bag and threw it into the water. The ducks hurried toward it, making cheerful ripples. Thomas laughed softly. "You're all too greedy," he said. "Slow down, there's enough for everyone." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the sunlight warm his face. In moments like this, he felt peaceful. There was no need to rush, no need to think too much. The world outside the river seemed busy and loud, but here, time moved differently, slower, kinder. After a while, he took a small notebook from his coat pocket. It was old and thin, its pages filled with neat handwriting. Inside were letters he had written to Anna after she was gone. Some were short, others long. Some spoke of his day, others spoke of his heart. He never sent them, of course, but writing them made him feel close to her. He opened to a fresh page and began to write. "My dearest Anna, today is warm and bright. The river is shining like glass. I fed the ducks again, and they fought as usual. You would have laughed at them. I miss your laughter most of all. It's been many years, but I still feel you here. Sometimes, I wonder if you miss me too. Maybe in some gentle corner of the sky, you still sit beside me. If so, thank you. You've never really left." He stopped for a moment, reading over the words, then closed the notebook with care. He held it against his chest, as if keeping the memory close. The river glimmered in the morning sun. Everything around him was alive: the wind, the water, the trees. Yet, somehow, the bench beside him still felt empty. And in that emptiness, Thomas felt both the weight of loss and the beauty of love that never truly fades. He sighed, stood up slowly, and looked once more at the water. "See you tomorrow," he whispered. "Same time." Then he turned and began his slow walk back home, leaving behind the bench, the river, and a little piece of his heart, just as he did every day. Part 3. The Girl with the Sketchbook. A few weeks later, on a cool Monday morning, Thomas noticed something unusual when he arrived at the river. Someone was sitting on his bench. It was rare for anyone else to sit there, especially that early. For a moment, he stopped on the path, unsure what to do. Then he smiled softly. The river didn't belong to him, and neither did the bench. He walked closer. It was a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s. She had long brown hair tied loosely behind her neck and wore a light gray sweater. On her lap was a sketchbook, and in her hand, a pencil. She didn't see Thomas at first. Her head was bent down, and her eyes moved carefully across the page, as her hand drew slow, thoughtful lines. Thomas stood quietly for a moment, not wanting to disturb her. Then the woman looked up and noticed him. She gave a quick, polite smile and started to move her things. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "Were you waiting for this bench?" Thomas shook his head and smiled kindly. "Not at all, my dear. Please don't move. I can share it with you if you don't mind." "Of course," she said, smiling again, this time more warmly. She moved her bag to one side to make space. Thomas sat down beside her. For a few moments they both stayed silent, listening to the water. The ducks swam lazily near the shore, the wind whispered through the leaves, and a small bird landed on the oak tree above them. The scene was peaceful, almost magical. "You like to draw?" Thomas asked softly. The girl nodded. "Yes, I come here sometimes. The river is so calm, and the light changes every hour. It feels alive, but quiet at the same time." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's true. The river listens better than people do." She smiled at that. That's a beautiful way to say it. Her name, he soon learned, was Lena. She lived in the town, not far from where Thomas did. She worked at a small art studio, teaching drawing to children. "They're full of energy," she said with a small laugh. "Sometimes too much. But I love them. They see beauty in everything." Thomas liked the way she spoke, gentle, thoughtful, as if she saw the world in soft colors. They didn't talk much that first day, but when she left, she said, "It was nice sitting with you." Thomas smiled. "And with you, young lady. Have a good day." As she walked away, he watched her carefully place the sketchbook under her arm. He noticed that she had drawn the river, the trees, and even a small figure sitting on the bench. Perhaps him. The next morning, when Thomas arrived again, the bench was empty. He sat down, fed the ducks, and opened his notebook. Yet he found himself looking up more often than usual, as if expecting her to appear again. She didn't that day, nor the next. But on Friday morning, she returned. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "Good morning," Thomas replied with a smile. "I was beginning to think you had forgotten about this place." "Never," she said. "I just had a busy week. But I missed the river." They sat together again, more comfortable this time. Lena drew quietly, and Thomas watched the ducks. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. The silence between them felt natural, not empty. Thomas found it pleasant, a different kind of company from what he was used to. After a while, Lena closed her sketchbook and looked at him. "You come here often, don't you?" "Every day," Thomas said. "For many years now." "Why this bench?" she asked gently. Thomas looked at the river for a long moment before answering. "Because it holds memories," he said softly. "My wife and I used to sit here. She loved the river. When she passed away, I made her a promise to keep visiting this place. It feels like she's still here somehow." Lena's expression softened. She didn't look away. "That's very beautiful," she said. "I think love doesn't really end. It just changes shape." Thomas turned his head and studied her face. "You're wise for your age," he said. "Most people your age are running after things. You seem to be looking for something else." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe because I lost someone too." Her voice grew quieter after that. Thomas didn't ask questions. He understood that kind of silence, the kind that protects the heart. They sat quietly for a while longer, listening to the sound of the water moving slowly past them. When it was time to leave, Lena said softly, "May I come here again?" Thomas nodded. "Of course. The river welcomes everyone." That night, as Thomas sat by his window at home, he thought about the girl with the sketchbook. For years, he had kept his world small and silent. But somehow, her presence that morning had changed something inside him, like sunlight touching a shadow that had forgotten how to fade. He smiled to himself, closed his notebook, and whispered, "Good night, Anna. You'd have liked her." Part 4. Stories of the Past. The days grew warmer, and the mornings began to shine with soft golden light. Thomas still came to the river every day, and now, more often than not, Lena came too. Sometimes she arrived before him, sitting quietly with her sketchbook open, already lost in her drawing. Other days, he would be there first, feeding the ducks or reading one of his old letters. They always greeted each other kindly, as if they had known each other for years. Lena enjoyed listening to Thomas talk. He had a gentle voice, low and calm, with the kind of warmth that comes from living a long, full life. He never spoke quickly. Every word seemed to carry weight. One morning, as they sat watching the river flow, Lena asked, "Thomas, what was your wife like?" "If you don't mind me asking." Thomas smiled. His eyes softened, and for a moment he looked far away, as if seeing something invisible to her. "Anna," he said quietly, "was full of life. She had this way of making everything feel lighter. Even on bad days, she could find something beautiful. She used to say, 'There's always one thing in a day to be thankful for.'" Lena nodded. "That sounds like something I'd write in my journal." Thomas chuckled. "You keep a journal too?" "Yes," she said. "I write about small things, moments I don't want to forget. Sometimes they're sad, sometimes simple, but they're mine." Thomas looked at her kindly. "You remind me of her. Anna loved small things too. She used to collect stones from this river. Every stone had a shape or color she liked. We had a jar full of them at home." He paused, smiling at the memory. "After she passed, I kept them all. They sit on the windowsill, catching the light." Lena listened closely. She didn't interrupt. She could feel the love in his voice, soft, steady, and endless, like the flow of the river beside them. "How long were you married?" she asked. 43 years, Thomas said proudly. "We met when we were young. I was shy, she was not. She spoke first, of course." He laughed quietly. "She asked me what book I was reading. It was a collection of poems. She told me she didn't like poetry. Too many sad words, she said, but she still wanted to know what I liked about it. That's how we started talking." "What did you tell her?" Lena asked, smiling. "That poetry makes pain sound beautiful," Thomas said. And she said, "Then you must have a lot of pain to make it so beautiful." She was right. His smile faded for a second, then returned softly. "She saw through me right from the start." Lena's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Thomas said simply. "She had the kind of heart that could hold anyone's sorrow and still stay light. Even when she got sick, she never complained. She used to tell me, 'Don't look at me with sadness, Tom. Look at me with love. It's lighter to carry.'" A soft silence followed. The river made a calm sound as it brushed against the shore. Lena looked down at her sketchbook, and for a while, neither of them spoke. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one. After some time, Thomas leaned back on the bench. "You know, Lena," he said, "when Anna died, I thought the world would stop. I thought the mornings would never feel bright again. But the river taught me something important. It never stops moving, no matter what happens. It carries everything away, but it also brings new things. That's life." Lena nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why you love it so much." "Maybe," Thomas said with a soft laugh. "Or maybe it's because it reminds me that love, like water, doesn't disappear. It just changes where it flows." Lena turned one of her sketches toward him. It was the river, the bench, and two faint figures sitting side by side. "I drew this last week," she said shyly. "I didn't show it before because it wasn't finished." Thomas looked at the drawing for a long moment. His eyes became wet. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "You captured it perfectly." "I wasn't sure if I should draw two people," Lena admitted, "but now I understand. The second one belongs there." Thomas smiled gently. "Yes," he whispered. "She always does." They sat there until the sun rose higher, turning the river silver. Before leaving, Lena said, "Thank you for sharing your story, Thomas." He smiled. "Thank you for listening. You remind me that stories are meant to be shared. Otherwise, they fade." That evening, Thomas wrote another letter to Anna. "My dearest, I met someone new today. A kind young woman who reminds me of spring. She listens the way you used to, with her heart. I told her about you. I hope that's all right. You've always loved stories, and I think ours is one worth telling. Love still lives here, even after all this time." He placed the letter carefully in his notebook, closed it, and looked out the window. The sky outside was a soft orange, and the river glowed in the distance. He felt something gentle move inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Part 5. The Girl's Secret. The following week, Lena came to the river earlier than usual. The morning sky was pale blue, and a thin fog rested on the surface of the water. She sat quietly on the bench, sketchbook open, but she didn't draw. Her hands rested still on her knees. When Thomas arrived, he noticed the change immediately. "Good morning, Lena," he said gently. "You're early today." She looked up and smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "I thought the river might help." Thomas sat beside her, placing his small paper bag on his lap. "The river is good for sleepless hearts," he said. "It doesn't ask questions, it just listens." Lena smiled again, but her eyes were distant. For a while, neither of them spoke. The ducks came and went, the wind brushed softly through the trees, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, after a long silence, Lena spoke quietly. "Thomas, may I tell you something?" "Of course," he said. "You can tell me anything." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "You know how I said I lost someone too? It was my brother. His name was Daniel." She stopped for a moment, as if saying his name out loud took all her strength. "He was only 23 when he died." Thomas's eyes softened. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened, his body still, his heart open. "He was my best friend," Lena continued. "We grew up together. He was the one who pushed me to paint, to dream, to believe that life could be beautiful, even when it hurt. He was studying music. He wanted to write songs that made people feel less alone." Her voice broke a little. "And he did, for a while." Thomas nodded slowly. "What happened?" Lena looked at the water. Her reflection shimmered beside his. "It was an accident," she said softly. "A car crash, late at night. He was on his way home from a concert. He never made it back." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The river seemed to move slower, as if listening. The sunlight touched the water, turning it to gold. "I didn't know how to live after that," Lena whispered. "Everything felt quiet. Too quiet. I stopped painting for almost a year. I didn't want to create anything. I thought, what's the point of beauty if the people you love can't see it?" Thomas looked at her kindly. "And yet here you are," he said softly, "creating beauty again." Lena smiled sadly. "It took time. My mother used to worry about me. She said I was disappearing even though I was still there. Then one day I walked past this river. I don't know why, but I sat down on this bench. It was so calm. The sound of the water reminded me of his music, soft, flowing, full of feeling. I cried for a long time that day, but it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months." Thomas nodded. "The river has that effect," he said. "It washes away what words cannot." Lena turned to him. "That's when I started coming back. Drawing the river helped me heal a little. And then I saw you here, every day, sitting so quietly. I wondered what brought you here too. I thought maybe you were waiting for someone, like I was." Thomas's eyes filled with gentle understanding. "In a way, yes," he said. "But I think we both found something else instead." "What's that?" she asked. "Peace," he said simply. "The kind that doesn't come from forgetting, but from remembering with love." Lena looked down at her sketchbook. "I used to draw things that were perfect," she said softly. "Now I draw things that are real, cracked, simple, but full of meaning. Like this bench, like the river, like people who've learned to keep walking even after losing something." Thomas smiled. "That's what living is, Lena. Learning to walk with what remains." They sat in silence again. The kind of silence that feels like company, not loneliness. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers. Lena closed her eyes for a moment and listened. "Do you ever stop missing her?" she asked quietly. Thomas thought for a moment. "No," he said honestly. "But missing someone changes. It becomes softer. It stops hurting like a wound and starts feeling like a memory you hold carefully. It's not pain anymore. It's love, wearing a different face." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "That's a beautiful way to put it." Thomas nodded. "Love doesn't end when people do. It stays in the things they touched, the songs they sang, the words they left behind. Sometimes it even lives in the people who come after." Lena looked at him and said quietly, "Maybe that's why we met." Thomas smiled gently. "Maybe it is." The river shimmered under the morning sun, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt a deep calm settle inside her. The grief was still there, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like part of her, a soft, quiet reminder of someone she loved, and someone she could keep alive through her art. As she stood to leave, she looked at Thomas and said, "Thank you for listening." He smiled. "Thank you for sharing." When Lena walked away that morning, Thomas stayed a little longer on the bench. He watched the river move and whispered, "You see, Anna, the river still brings new hearts to heal." Part 6, Letters Never Sent. The next morning, The sky was soft gray, and a gentle rain had just ended. Drops of water hung on the leaves like small pearls, and the air smelled clean and new. Thomas arrived at the river holding his old brown coat close to his chest. The path was wet, but he didn't mind. He liked mornings like this, quiet, calm, and full of memory. Lena was already there, sitting under the oak tree. She had brought an umbrella and her sketchbook, but instead of drawing, she was simply watching the water. When she saw Thomas, she smiled. "You came, even in the rain," she said. "Of course," he replied, smiling back. "The river doesn't stop for rain. Why should I?" They both laughed softly. Then they sat together in silence, listening to the sound of the water and the dripping leaves. After a while, Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The edges were frayed, and the pages were yellow with time. He turned it in his hands for a moment, then looked at Lena. "I want to show you something," he said. Lena looked at him with curiosity. "What is it?" He smiled gently. "It's my heart, written in ink." He opened the notebook carefully, as if it were fragile. Inside, the pages were filled with neat handwriting. Some were long letters, others just a few short lines. He turned to one and began to read softly, his voice trembling slightly. "My dearest Anna, today the sky was cloudy, but the ducks still came. They don't mind the weather, and maybe I shouldn't either. I thought of the day we built our little garden. You said flowers were just smiles from the earth. I planted one today, a white lily, your favorite. I hope it grows." Thomas closed the book and looked at the river. "I've written to her every week since she passed," he said quietly. "At first I thought it was foolish, writing to someone who can't answer, but it became my way of breathing." Lena listened closely, her eyes soft with emotion. "It's not foolish," she said. "It's love, kept alive through words." Thomas smiled faintly. "That's what I tell myself. Sometimes when I write, it feels like she's reading, like she's sitting beside me, her hand on mine." He opened another page and handed the notebook to Lena. "Would you like to read one?" She hesitated for a moment, not wanting to intrude, but his gentle nod encouraged her. She took the notebook carefully, as if it were something sacred, and began to read aloud. "My dearest Anna, I saw a young girl by the river today. She reminds me of you when you were young, curious, kind, full of questions. She draws instead of talks, but her eyes say everything. I think you would like her. She listens the way you did, with her heart first. Maybe you sent her here to remind me that love still has new faces." Lena's voice grew softer toward the end. She looked up at Thomas, her eyes shining. "You wrote about me?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes. You became part of the story without even trying. You see, Anna always believed that people meet for a reason. Maybe she sent you to keep me company. Or maybe she sent me to remind you that love doesn't end." Lena closed the notebook gently, holding it close. "Thomas, these letters, they're beautiful. They're like tiny pieces of time, each one alive." Thomas looked at the river, his expression calm. "When you love someone deeply," he said, "you don't stop talking to them. You just learn a different way to speak." Lena nodded. "And writing is your language." He smiled. "Yes, the river listens to my words when no one else is here. And somehow, I think she hears them too." For a while they sat in silence again. The clouds began to break apart, and soft sunlight touched the surface of the water. A rainbow appeared faintly above the trees, its colors pale but clear. "Do you ever read them all again?" Lena asked quietly. "Sometimes," Thomas said, "but not often. I write them to let things go, not to hold them." "That's brave," Lena whispered. Thomas smiled. "It's the only way to keep living. We can't carry everything forever. The letters help me remember, but they also help me move forward." Lena placed the notebook carefully back in his hands. "Would you ever publish them?" she asked. He laughed softly. "Oh no, they're not for the world. They're for her. Every word belongs to her." "But they could help people," Lena said gently. "They could help others who've lost someone, to see that love can survive in memory." Thomas looked at her with kind eyes. "Perhaps one day when I'm gone, you can decide that for me." Lena smiled sadly. "I'd be honored." The river shimmered with soft light, and a warm breeze moved through the leaves above them. Thomas closed his notebook, holding it to his chest. "You know," he said softly, "the world measures love in years and promises, but real love is measured in moments, and in what remains after everything else is gone." Lena looked at him, her eyes wet but calm. "And in letters never sent," she said. Thomas smiled. "Yes, especially those." They sat there until the afternoon sun turned the river silver. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was full of understanding, and the sound of the water carried their unspoken words, two hearts sharing the same silence. Part 7. The season changes. Autumn came quietly, the way it always does, not with a sudden change, but with small whispers of gold in the trees. The mornings grew cooler, the air thinner, and the river carried leaves on its surface like little boats of memory. The oak tree above the bench began to drop its first yellow leaves, and Thomas would sometimes catch one in his hand before it touched the ground. "Even falling can be graceful," he said once, smiling to himself. Lena continued to visit, sometimes with her sketchbook, sometimes just to sit beside him. She loved autumn, the soft air, the smell of old leaves, the sound of boots on wet ground. Her drawings changed too. The bright colors of summer were gone, replaced by warm browns, soft oranges, and quiet light. "Everything looks softer now," she said one morning as she drew the river. "Even the sun seems tired." Thomas chuckled. "Maybe the sun just learned to rest," he said. "It's been shining all year." They both laughed gently. Their friendship had grown natural and deep. They no longer needed to fill every silence with words. Sometimes a smile or a small nod was enough. Lena would draw while Thomas read or wrote. Occasionally he shared one of his letters aloud, and sometimes she showed him her drawings. Each time, it felt like they were exchanging small pieces of their hearts. One morning, Thomas arrived at the bench later than usual. His walk had been slower and his breathing heavier. Lena noticed it immediately. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded with a small smile. "Just getting old, that's all. My legs don't move as quickly as they used to." Lena frowned gently. "You should take it easy." Thomas laughed. "If I take it any easier, I'll stop completely." They both smiled, but inside, Lena felt a small ache. She could see that Thomas was getting weaker. His hands trembled slightly when he fed the ducks, and he sometimes paused to catch his breath. Still, he never missed a morning. Rain or shine, warm or cold, he came to the river. as if keeping that promise to Anna gave him strength. One day, as they sat under the oak tree, the wind began to blow harder, and leaves swirled around them in golden circles. "It's like the river is dancing," Lena said with a laugh. Thomas looked at her and smiled. "Yes," he said softly. "Anna used to say that autumn was the season when nature remembers everything it loved and lets it go gently." "That's beautiful," Lena whispered. "She was beautiful," Thomas replied. They sat quietly for a while, watching the river carry the floating leaves downstream. "You know," Thomas said after a pause, "when I was younger I was afraid of change. I thought it meant losing things. But the older I get, the more I understand that change doesn't take away what matters. It just shows it in a new light." Lena looked at him thoughtfully. "Like the seasons," she said. "Exactly," he nodded. "Each one has its own beauty. Even the coldest winter has quiet warmth if you look for it." The next few weeks passed softly, like pages turning in a gentle book. The trees became bare, the river slower, the air sharper. Lena began wearing thicker scarves, and Thomas carried a small thermos of tea. Sometimes they shared it, sitting close together to stay warm. One afternoon, a flock of birds flew across the sky in a perfect V shape. Thomas watched them with quiet wonder. "They know when to leave," he said. "They don't fight the season. They just trust the wind to take them where they need to go." Lena smiled. "Do you ever wish you could do that too?" Thomas chuckled. "Maybe I already am," he said. She didn't ask what he meant, but she understood. There was something in his tone, peaceful, accepting, like a man who had made peace with the idea of time. As autumn deepened, the days grew shorter. The golden mornings turned to gray skies, and the wind carried the scent of rain. On their last meeting before winter, Lena brought a small gift, a new notebook, wrapped neatly in brown paper and tied with a piece of twine. "It's for your letters," she said shyly. "You've almost filled the other one." Thomas smiled warmly, his eyes shining. He untied the string and opened the first page. There, in Lena's careful handwriting, were 5 words. For Thomas. "Keep writing. Always." He ran his fingers over the words slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," she said softly. They sat there for a while longer, watching the river move gently under the gray sky. The wind grew colder, but neither of them wanted to leave yet. The silence between them was full of meaning, full of everything they didn't need to say. Finally, Thomas stood and looked at her. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything," she replied. "When spring comes, if I'm not here, you'll still visit the river." Lena's eyes filled with emotion. "Of course," she said. "But you will be here." Thomas smiled, that quiet, knowing smile of his. "The river always remembers," he said. "Even if I'm not sitting on the bench, a part of me will be." Lena couldn't speak. She just nodded, holding back tears. The wind moved through the oak leaves, whispering softly above them, and for a moment it felt as if the river itself was listening, carrying their promise somewhere far beyond time. Part 8. The Day. Thomas Doesn't Come. Winter had passed, and spring was slowly returning to the town. The river had melted from its icy sleep, and the trees began to wear light green again. The air smelled of new beginnings, soft, wet earth, young grass, and distant flowers. Lena had missed the river during the cold months, and now, As the mornings grew warmer, she returned to the bench beneath the oak tree, eager to see her old friend again. She carried her sketchbook, as always, and a small basket of pastries. Thomas loved the ones with jam in the center. As she walked down the familiar path, she smiled, imagining his kind laugh, his stories, and his gentle way of seeing the world. But when she reached the bench, it was empty. The river moved quietly as always, the ducks floated in lazy circles, and sunlight danced on the surface of the water, but the brown coat was not there. The paper bag with bread, the soft voice greeting the ducks, the slow, steady presence that made the mornings whole, none of it was there. Lena stopped walking. For a moment, she simply stared at the empty bench, her heart tightening. "Maybe he's late," she whispered to herself. Thomas was always early, but perhaps today was different. She sat down, placed the basket beside her, and waited. The minutes passed slowly. A bird sang in the distance, then flew away. The sun rose higher, touching the water with gold. Lena looked at the path, hoping to see his familiar figure, the slow steps, the small smile, the notebook in his hand. But no one came. After an hour, she took a deep breath. The river sounded louder now, or maybe it was just the silence pressing around her. She reached into her bag and took out her sketchbook, but her hands trembled too much to draw. Finally, she stood and walked to the edge of the river. "Where are you, Thomas?" she said softly. The words broke in the wind. That afternoon, Lena went into town. She stopped at the little bakery Thomas liked, then the post office, and finally the small grocery store. Everyone knew him. When she asked, their faces grew quiet. The woman at the counter placed a gentle hand on Lena's arm and said softly, "Didn't you hear, dear? Thomas passed away last week, peacefully, in his sleep." For a moment, Lena couldn't move. The world seemed to stop. The sound of the bell above the shop door, the murmur of voices, even her own breathing, everything felt far away, like she was underwater. "Oh," she whispered finally, her voice barely there. "I see." The woman gave her a kind look. He was a good man, always so gentle. Everyone in town loved him. Lena nodded slowly, trying to hold herself together. "Yes," she said quietly. "He was." That evening, she returned to the river. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and silver, and the water reflected the fading light. The bench looked the same, yet everything felt different. The space beside her was heavy with silence, a silence filled with memory. She sat down and placed her basket beside her. Inside was one pastry left untouched. She smiled sadly and whispered, "For you, Thomas." Then she looked toward the water and felt tears fill her eyes. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "You're still here. I can feel it." Lena stayed until the sun disappeared behind the trees. The air grew cool, and the first stars appeared above the river. When she finally stood, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the side of the bench, carved carefully into the wood, were a few small words. "For Anna. For the river. For every morning that remains." Lena traced the letters with her fingertips, her heart aching and full at the same time. She sat back down, opened her sketchbook, and began to draw. The bench, the river, the oak tree, and an empty space beside her. But as she drew, she realized it didn't feel empty at all. The river still flowed. The leaves still whispered. The world had lost a man, but it had kept his kindness, his peace, his love. When she finished her drawing, She closed the book gently and whispered, "Good night, my friend." The river remembers. And with that, she walked slowly home, the sound of the water following her, calm, endless, eternal. Part 9. The Last Letter. A few days after she learned of Thomas's passing, Lena found herself walking to the river every morning, just as he once did. It felt strange at first, the silence heavier than before, but being there brought her comfort. She often sat on the bench and spoke softly, as if he were still beside her. "You see, Thomas," she would whisper, "the ducks still come. The river still shines. You were right, it remembers." One morning, when she arrived, she noticed a small envelope placed neatly on the bench. The paper was old and folded carefully, her name written across the front in Thomas's familiar handwriting, for Lena. Her heart stopped for a moment. She picked it up with trembling fingers and sat down. The handwriting was steady, strong, and full of warmth, just like the man himself. Slowly, she opened it and began to read. "My dear Lena, if you are reading this, it means that my morning walks have come to an end. Don't be sad, my friend. I've had a long, kind life, full of laughter, love, and quiet mornings by the river. I could not have asked for more. You came into my days like spring sunlight after a long winter. You brought new life to this old bench, new stories to tell, and new hope to a heart that had grown still. I didn't expect that, and yet I believe it was meant to happen. Life has a way of bringing people together just when they need each other most. You told me once that you stopped painting because the world felt empty. I hope you never stop again. Paint the river, the trees, the changing light. Paint the moments that remind you to keep going. That is how we stay alive in one another's memories. I'm leaving my notebook to you. Inside are the letters I wrote to Anna, my words, my heart, my years. You don't have to read them all, but if you ever feel lonely, open one and listen to the river. You'll hear her voice, and maybe mine too. Don't let sorrow weigh you down, Lena. Grief is not an ending. It's a bridge between what was and what will be. Love doesn't fade. It changes its shape and continues, in the water, in the wind, and in kind hearts like yours. Thank you for sitting with me, for listening, for sharing your story, and for reminding me that even at the end of a long road, friendship can still bloom. You were my final spring. With love, always, Thomas." Lena finished reading and sat very still. The letter rested in her lap, her tears falling silently onto the paper. But her heart felt strangely light, not broken, not lost, just full. The kind of full that comes from being deeply touched by another soul. She looked at the river, and for a moment she imagined Thomas sitting beside her, his brown coat catching the morning light, his soft smile watching the ducks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." She opened the basket she had brought that morning. Inside was a small white lily, Anna's favorite flower. She placed it gently in the water and watched as it floated away, spinning slowly with the current. "This is for both of you," she said, "for your love that never ended." The lily drifted farther, carried by the same river that had carried their stories, their laughter, their quiet mornings. The wind picked up slightly, and the oak tree above her rustled, as if whispering something only she could understand. Lena took out her sketchbook and turned to a fresh page. With careful hands, she began to draw again. The river, the sunlight, and two figures sitting side by side on the old wooden bench. One was an old man with gentle eyes, the other a young woman holding a pencil, and between them the river shimmered like silver thread, endless, timeless, alive. When she finished, she closed her book softly. The world around her was quiet, but it was not empty. Thomas's words still echoed in her heart. Love doesn't fade, it changes its shape and continues. Lena smiled through her tears and whispered, "Then let it continue." And as the morning sun rose higher, the river glowed brighter, carrying their stories onward, one current at a time. Part 10. Love Leaves a Mark. Months passed, and the days grew warmer. The oak tree above the bench turned green again, and wildflowers began to bloom along the riverbank. Life moved forward, just as Thomas had said it would. Lena still came to the river almost every morning. She sat on the same bench, brought crumbs for the ducks, and carried her sketchbook filled with drawings of seasons, faces, and quiet skies. The town had learned to accept that the old man was gone, but for Lena he was still there, in the wind, in the sunlight, in the soft rhythm of the water. She often read his letters, not all at once, but slowly, one by one. Each letter felt like a conversation across time, a small piece of wisdom wrapped in gentle words. Some made her cry, others made her laugh, but all of them made her feel less alone. They were more than letters. They were lessons about love, patience, and peace. One morning, as she sat sketching, a little boy and his mother stopped nearby. The boy pointed to the river and asked, "Who's that bench for?" The mother smiled. "It used to belong to an old man who loved this river very much," she said. Lena turned and smiled at them. "Yes," she added softly, "and now it belongs to everyone who wants to remember someone they love." The boy smiled shyly and waved at her before running toward the ducks. Lena watched him throw pieces of bread into the water, just as Thomas had done for years. It made her heart warm. Life was continuing, quietly, beautifully, naturally. Later that day, she took out her sketchbook and began to write on the last page. Not a drawing this time, but a letter. "Dear Thomas, you were right. The river remembers. Every morning I come here, I feel you in the air. I hear you in the water, in the trees, even in the laughter of the children. Your bench is never truly empty. People sit here every day, reading, drawing, thinking, remembering. It has become a place of peace, just as you made it. I kept painting, just like you told me to. My first exhibition opens next month. I called it Letters to the River. Every painting was inspired by our mornings together. They're not just mine. They belong to you too. Sometimes when I miss you, I imagine you and Anna together, sitting by another river somewhere beyond this world, still feeding the ducks, still smiling at the sunrise. Thank you for teaching me that love never dies. It changes, it moves, it becomes part of everything we touch. You showed me that even when people leave, the kindness they give remains. You taught me that love always leaves a mark. With love, Lena." She closed the sketchbook and smiled through gentle tears. Then she stood up, walked to the water's edge, and let the breeze move through her hair. The river flowed calmly, carrying sunlight across its surface like threads of gold. Lena placed a single lily in the water, just as she had done months before, and watched it drift away. "This is for you," she whispered, "for love that still flows." The flower spun gently in the current, carried downstream until it disappeared. But Lena didn't feel loss. She felt peace. She knew that everything Thomas had said was true. Love doesn't fade. It only changes its form. It becomes memory, art, kindness, and the soft voice that tells us to keep going. As she sat back down, she noticed another young woman approaching the bench with a notebook in her hand. She smiled and asked if she could sit. Lena nodded, moving her things aside. "Of course," she said kindly. "There's always room for one more." The young woman smiled with gratitude and sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The river whispered softly between them, the same way it had once whispered between Thomas and Lena. And in that quiet space, something gentle and eternal lived on. The same peace, the same connection, the same love. The sun shone on the water, the ducks circled lazily, and the oak tree swayed in the breeze. The bench stood steady beneath it, a witness to time, loss, friendship, and love. And though the seasons would continue to change, one truth would never fade. Love leaves a mark, not on stone, not on wood, but in the hearts it touches. Moral of the story: love never truly ends. It changes shape, flows forward like a river, and lives on through kindness, memory, and the hearts of those who remain.